You're Paul. I'm the new Sprintern.
Sprint plus...
Intern. Yeah, clever, right? Looking at getting an amazing iPhone 8?
Yeah, because...
Now you can lease one iPhone 8, get the other one on Sprint to give your second phone to your new friend.
And you get the best price for unlimited.
And now lease one iPhone 8 and get a second one on us. Visit your local Sprint store, sprint.com/iPhone, or call 1-800-SPRINT1 today.
iPhone 8, 64 gigabyte, $29.17 a month. Second iPhone 8 after $29.17 a month. Credit applied within 2 bills. Requires 2 new lines or 1 new and 1 upgrade with 18-month leases. Early termination results in full balance due. Excludes tax subject to credit and 30-day activation restrictions apply.
Archangels, ghosts, and Bigfoot. Oh my. It's just another night for Supernatural Girls. Real stories, real answers to life's biggest supernatural mysteries. And now for another exciting interview with paranormal experts from this world and others. Here's your host, paranormal researcher Patricia Baker, on the one, the only Supernatural Girls.
Welcome, everyone, to another exciting episode of Supernatural Girls Radio. I'm your host, Patricia Baker. I am here with my co-host, Patricia Kirkman, PK, all the way from Tucson. How are you, PK?
I have just been melting all day. It's been in the 90s today.
90s.
I don't think that the weather knows that it's fall.
I agree with you.
Smells like it. The leaves are dropping like crazy. But the poor plants don't know what to do.
I know what you mean. I had friends of mine telling me their roses are blooming, their flowers are blooming here in New England, and It's been very warm. I'm not complaining because I know what's coming around the corner.
I know it, but our plants are going to die not knowing what to do.
Oh, really? Well, let's hope not.
Another one of those surprises.
Let's hope they thrive. Oh, my goodness. What a show we have tonight.
Yes, we do.
My God, Stan Gordon. He is one of the golden oldies. He has been researching UFOs and strange creatures for over 50 years. And he's with us tonight. We are going to talk about all the stuff that he knows, all about Kecksburg and Bigfoot and just incredible thing that only Stan knows. So we're going to bring him on in a few minutes. But first, what's going on with the numbers? What do we got going on with that?
Well, the numbers, all I'm going to do is tell you this. Halloween night is a 6, which is all about family type situations, wanting things to be perfect. So do oversee the youngsters, because I found out that Halloween evening is the most dangerous for youngsters when it comes to traffic accidents.
Oh, no.
They have more children are damaged, injured, or I'm not going to even say the other word, on Halloween Eve than at any other time.
Wow. So definitely keep a close eye on your kids this Halloween. I know a lot of people have parties now. Instead of having the kids going out trick-or-treating to unknown houses, they just do everything in one central location, which makes a lot of sense in today's world.
I think it makes a lot of sense because in the old days when people could go around in the neighborhoods, and that was fine. But the neighborhoods aren't the same anymore. And when they started having candy was tampered with and things of that nature, that's when the city started putting some of these things together, which is great. It's much better to have them safe and in one space.
It is. It is indeed.
So I'm looking forward to hearing about it from my 6-year-old granddaughter. She's already playing with her costume, trying to figure out what to wear. Lord, she's whipped me through every store in town.
Well, that's the fun part of Halloween.
Yes.
And so we hope everybody has fun and stays safe. You also found some interesting trivia about Halloween. How they used to use turnips instead of pumpkins? Is that true?
Turnip was what they used for before the pumpkin was used. They carved out the turnip, put a candle in it, and they used it as we use the jack-o'-lantern today.
How funny. Oh, my goodness.
I guess they must have been more prevalent than pumpkins.
I guess it was easier.
Yeah.
Now, you also found interesting little ghost stories to tell us tonight and bring our attention to.
well, I was taking a look at some things, and they're talking about in England, of course, there's with the death of Anne Boleyn at the hand of good old Henry, that her remnants, shall we say, keep walking the walls and are very much prevalent there. But how many times the different people from that era, they don't know they're gone. One of the most important ghost sightings had to do in England with Henry's wife. And nothing after that ever seemed to be put into place properly. So if you take a look at some of the things ongoing, we take a look at here in the States where we've got the Queen Mary, the ship in Long Beach, that has many, many, shall we say, ghosts and goblins involved. There are people that are seeing sightings of the people that worked on the ships. They also see around the pool area. They will see people in the old-fashioned bathing suits and dress. And even though the pool is empty, they'll see wet footprints around the pool. So I thought, that is a little bit much.
How cool is that? So
yes.
Yes, a very heavily populated ship. And
Well,
yes, ship, I believe. Victoria Gross takes people
Right.
through the ship. I guess they've seen very unusual things.
Yeah, there has been. And one of the things, too, is they keep saying that Churchill used to be on there. He had his own place on board the ship. And they can smell his cigars all the time. They always know when he's out and about. But they keep
Wow.
seeing phantom crews that go along with it, walking the decks. And it's really incredible. But one of the things that I came across that I thought was interesting was the fact in the ancients, when they started having funerals, it's to put the spirits in the ground so that they know that it's exit, that this person is dead. They don't want it coming back. So they figure by the funeral, that let it know that it no longer had a right to come back and walk among the rest of us, even though they still do.
Wow, so that drew the line. Yeah, they definitely do. Well, that's so interesting. And then we also found a wild story that we posted on our Facebook page about a patient in a hospital in South Africa who they believe teleported. He was in his bed. They came to check on him. He was missing. They couldn't find him anywhere. And I guess it was a week or so later, they found him up in the ceiling. They have no idea how he got there. He was in his bed one minute, gone the next. They don't know if this is criminal or some kind of weird murder situation. They have no clue. But it's a very strange thing. And it's interesting they're mentioning teleportation in relation to this particular event. But that's on our Facebook page, which you all should go and read it. It's very, very strange.
That it is. One thing I was going to mention, too, about in Tucson, there's a hotel called the Hotel Congress. It's where Dillinger and his men came to, shall we say, hang out. There's a lot of different people that stayed there because it was near the railroad track. And they ended up having a fire at the hotel that took out the third floor. But when the people that were staying there escaped out into the public, one of the men of Dillinger's group asked the firemen to go up and get their bags because they had bags up there that were quite heavy to bring them down. Well, when the firemen went up to bring the bags out, he checked it out. There was money and guns, etc., in it. So he went and told the police, and that's how Dillinger got caught. So I guess you should have left your luggage behind.
Well, who told us karma never forgets an address? Oh, goodness. Well, tonight, we're going to move right into this amazing guest that we have, Stan Gordon. I'm going to tell you a little bit about him before we bring him on because he's quite impressive. He was trained as an electronics technician who specialized in radio communications. Speaking of radio communications, I'm hearing an echo, and I really hope our audience is not. I'm hearing it too. But anyways, you're hearing it too. Well, let's hope they don't have to listen to it. And if you are hearing it, please let us know in the chat room. Go to irnchat.com.
Yeah.
Let us know. And if you have any questions for Stan, that's where you want to write them also. So Stan worked in the advanced consumer electronics sales field for over 40 years. He's lived in Greensburg, Pennsylvania all of his life. And he began his interest in the UFO subject and other strange incidents at the age of 10 in 1959. And in the late 1960s, he acted as the telephone UFO sighting report investigations coordinator for the UFO Research Institute of Pittsburgh. So he began his field investigations of UFOs and other mysterious events in 1965 and is the primary investigator of the December 9, 1965 UFO crash recovery incident that occurred near Kecksburg, Pennsylvania. One of our favorites. That's an amazing case. So he established a UFO hotline for the public to report UFO sightings, for him to investigate. He's been involved in many television productions. He has a number of books, which I'm going to tell you about right now. He is the author of Really Mysterious Pennsylvania, Silent Invasion, the Pennsylvania UFO Bigfoot Casebook, and Astonishing Encounters, Pennsylvania's Unknown Creatures. So let's get him on the show, and hopefully this echo will go away. So Stan, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on.
Our pleasure. So my goodness, you have everything that we love going on in your life, and we want to know it all. So where would you like to start? Which event do you want to start with? Kecksburg, or do you want to start with your triangle of events over there? Which one do you want to tell us about first?
Well, maybe I should tell a little bit about how Halloween season, how I got involved in this, because coincidentally, my birthday happens to be during the Halloween season.
Oh.
And because of that, it was in 1959, on my 10th birthday, my parents gave me an AM radio as a birthday gift, and I happened to be tuning around the radio dial that night, and because of Halloween, there were some radio shows talking about haunted houses and flying saucers and strange things, and I was a curious 10-year-old, and I wanted to know, gee, these people are making these stories up, they telling the truth. So I began to make a lot of trips at our local Greensburg library and read all the books they had. And that's kind of where it started for me. And then I was 16 years old when the incident happened near Kecksburg, PA, which is about 12 miles from where I live. And I started documenting that case as it was breaking on the news that afternoon or that evening. And I began to go out into the field to investigate all kind of phenomena after that. And I've been doing it ever since. And now, 58 years later, I'm still very busy getting a lot of reports coming in here pretty much continuously. My hotline has never stopped ringing since 1969. Between that and the emails I get every day, it's amazing what's going on out there.
It is. Now, please tell everybody your website so they'll know how to contact you.
Yeah, they can just go to, of course, www.stangordon.info, I-N-F-O. So it's stangordon.info.
Terrific, terrific. So you are in love with the paranormal just like we are, and that's why we love having you on. Now, tell us, for Kecksburg, that was huge, and it was one of our favorite cases. So much went on during that time. There was a lot of cover-up, but there were a lot of witnesses, so it was hard to cover it up, right?
Yeah, we could talk literally for days about what I've uncovered about Kecksburg. And I was 16 when it happened, as I mentioned, and how it all began. It was Thursday, December 9th, 1965, and I was listening to the major radio station in Pittsburgh that night, KDKA. They had a very well-known talk radio show called Contact on, and the host of the program had a person on who I wanted to listen to. You might recognize his name was Frank Edwards, who was journalist who he had written some books on strange happenings, so I wanted to tune in to listen to that radio show. And as we're listening, interestingly, pretty much the entire program was concentrating on breaking news of this brilliant fireball. This fiery object was seen from Ontario, Canada, over Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. And apparently that object came in over the greater Pittsburgh area about 4:47 p.m. that afternoon, just getting dark in this area. And multitudes of people saw this object. and they were calling the police and the radio and TV and newspapers reporting this. And it was fascinating just to hear what was going on. So they were interviewing eyewitnesses, they were interviewing reporters, they're reading the breaking newswire stories that are coming across about the sightings. And as the evening went on, things got even more interesting. I can remember those days very well. I was running back and forth from the living room where the black and white console TV was to the radio in the other room, trying to get all the latest reports. And the KDK TV in Pittsburgh was breaking in that evening with live reports that the military was now arriving in the Kecksburg area to search for an unidentified flying object. So it was a very intriguing night. I wasn't driving yet. I had no way to get out there, stayed up late. And I couldn't wait to get up next morning and go to the local newsstand, see what was in the local newspapers. And there it was. It was the headlines in all the local papers, and it was making national news. Our local paper, the Greensburg Tribune-Review, had 2 editions. The early morning edition had Army ropes off area, unidentified flying object falls near Kecksburg. And very interesting account. There was one of the reporters, Bob Gaddy, was there that evening, and there were other reporters also from the Trib on the scene, and indicated that something apparently did fall down into the Wooded Ravine, that no one was being allowed anywhere near the object, that the area was cordoned off on the orders of the U.S. Army and the state police, that they were waiting the arrival of civilian scientists and Army engineers to examine whatever had fallen. There was also discussion that there was consideration this thing may have been radioactive. Well, thought that was a really interesting account. The later edition of the newspaper comes out with a number of different stories, including one that immediately caught my eye, which said, searchers failed to find object.
Oh.
And it went on to say that,
Really?
there was a search till early morning hours, but absolutely nothing was found. That officially they were saying it was just people's imagination, that they had seen a bright meteor in the sky, but nothing had fallen to the ground.
So now we know, based on that report that was given, that this was the real deal. This was it. Because they wouldn't have tried to cover it up if it wasn't.
Well, you know, the next day again, you hear the media report, and there was so much we did not know at the time. I mean, there was so few names in the paper. I tried to follow up the next day. I was writing down everything I could, and it was a period over weeks and months and years that I began to get a lot of new information on the case. And I began to, on occasion, I would find somebody who was involved. I would get information from relatives and neighbors and friends of people who were involved. And by the 1980s, I had a lot of information which suggests that there was a lot more to the story than anybody knew about. So we really began to do a very detailed investigation. And since then, I've interviewed hundreds of people. I've lost track, many hundreds of people who have information on the case. I tracked down the reporters who are on the scene, the volunteer firemen, the state police, military sources. And, I mean, there is absolutely no doubt whatsoever that something fell from the sky and the military came and recovered it. And it's a fascinating story. And what we didn't know at the time was that this object, whatever it was moving relatively slowly. It was making change in direction along its trajectory, along its path. The people who saw it come down in the woods that afternoon said it did not come down at a high rate of speed, such as you would have, for example, with a reentry of space debris or a meteor coming in. They said it came down almost like it made a controlled landing, but we know it crashed through the trees. It knocked trees over, broke the top of trees out. We discovered that trajectory and that path of damage in the 1980s, and what we found out was that some of the local people, soon after it fell, went down into the Wooded Ravine, and they came across this large metallic acorn-shaped object semi-buried in the ground. And some of these people were only a few feet away from it. And this thing was kind of a big acorn-shaped thing, maybe 10 to 12 feet or more in length, about 8 to 10 feet in diameter. It's one solid piece of metal, off gold bronze color. There's no rivet marks, no seams, no fuselage, no windows, no wings. On the raised up back like you'd have on an acorn witnesses who were close to it said there were raised up markings off the surface that looked more like some type of symbols and writing. And luckily, one of the key witnesses, because of his family background, he was a volunteer fireman at the time, he stood only a few feet away from him, and he said what he saw, because he was familiar with seeing Russian or Cyrillic, and he said that's not what it was. And in fact, from his memory, over the years, he spent time in libraries looking up ancient writings, and he said the closest thing he could recall would be similar to ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics.
No kidding.
Wow.
It's a fascinating story.
That is.
No doubt. Yeah, and there's absolutely no doubt that the military was there. I mean, it made national news about the military being there. I interviewed reporters who either interacted with the military or saw the military, saw military vehicles. Hundreds of people that night, after hearing the radio and TV broadcasts from all around Pittsburgh about a UFO falling, they descended on the small little farming community to try to get a look at this thing down in the woods. But by the time a lot of those people got out there, the area was already cordoned off. A lot of the roads were being shut down. Hundreds of people were coming in. I mean, it was an amazing account from so many different people. But I also found out that there were a number of people. I should say this. First, you had the local people right after the object fell, went down the woods. Then later, you had volunteer firemen coming in who were getting reports that this may have been a possible plane crash. So they were setting up a search in a large wooded area, of course not aware that other people already went down on the woods. They were looking for a downed aircraft. But some of those teams came across the object. And then you had the military come in, and when they got in, then everybody was thrown out of the area. What the military didn't know was that there were people who had already been down there, and there were some people actually hiding down in the woods, which we were able to find some. And they were watching a military operation, how they loaded this thing on the flatbed truck. And when I found out,
they couldn't keep a secret then very well, could they?
I'm sorry, I missed that.
I said they couldn't keep a secret very well, could they? I mean, that's great that there were people hiding, that people could see it, that you have so many witnesses. But let me ask you this, Stan, because you've done such a thorough investigation over so many years. Have you been told to stop? Have you been told to back off? Have you been told not to talk about this?
No, I have not. And it may be well because I've been in the public eye for years and years investigating this, that there are so many people who are involved. So what's interesting about the case is, while a number of people have gone public about this, over the years, and done some of the different TV shows and radio shows with me, the majority of people I've interviewed have still never gone public, and unfortunately many of them are now deceased. But many of those witnesses who were involved at that time period were kids or teenagers. Well, they later grew up to be educators and police officers, CEOs, engineers, all kind of professional people. One was even the district attorney. And for various reasons, they didn't want to go public. Now, some of these people, after they retired, they did provide me more information, and some did go public. But after the event came out the next day in the paper, I mean, most of these people just kept their mouth shut. They talked to a few friends and relatives and neighbors, but that was it. They never came forward because the government said nothing had fallen. They knew was not what happened, and they just kept quiet for years and years. So it wasn't easy to find a lot of these people. I mean, a lot of these people were not forthcoming. It's because I got tips, even anonymous tips, and we followed up and found some of these people. But a lot of these people just decided to keep their mouth shut.
Exactly. Well, you can see why. I mean, there's not a lot of upside to sharing this information, especially when the media said it didn't happen. But what about... I'm sorry, go ahead, PK.
No, I was just going to ask if intimidation was used against those people.
You got to remember, there were so many people involved. Mm-hmm. There's no way that they could follow up and track down all the people who were out there and involved with the incident. Right. But there were some individuals, we talked to their families. I've got information over the years from relatives of people who believe that somebody did intimidate some of the people in their family who was involved at the time. there's a lot of interesting aspects of this case. Probably one of the most interesting because it's so well documented. In fact, today I just happened to be at an event and I saw one of those prime witnesses who happened to be there today when I walked in. But the first reporter that we know on the scene was the late John Murphy, who was the news director at the local WHJB radio station, which was the prime news outlet back in '65. And he was on another incident that afternoon when he got a radio call to go out to Route 30 East that there had been a report of an explosion in the sky, and he went out there and he didn't see anything, and he went into the station. By then, the phone's ringing off the hook at the radio station about all these people calling in about it, and he was doing the 6:30 evening news, and it was right around that time that a caller reported in. There was actually the mother of a young boy who had seen the object going down and told them that that thing that they're looking for apparently fell in a wood area not too far from where they lived, which would be outside of Kecksburg. And so Murphy took all the information down, called the state police, gave them the information, then he hurried out to Kecksburg. Well, there was a lot of information that was never released publicly at the time. From him or others. He actually went on to produce a very informative special radio show called Object in the Woods that was released about a week later in a censored fashion. But what we found out is, and I did a documentary I won a film award for about this called Kecksburg, The Untold Story, which is still out there, and I interviewed Murphy's wife and several of the people that worked at the radio station with him, and what was not made public was the fact that apparently he got down into the woods before the state police fire marshal and another investigator arrived on the scene. He was in radio contact with his wife and some of the other people, and he came up out of the woods and he told them that he had gone down in the woods, he had seen the object, he had taken pictures of it that had strange markings on it. At some point, the film in his camera was confiscated by some of the authorities on the scene. Apparently, he had another roll hidden that they didn't know about. I talked to one or two people who had seen the black and white pictures at that time. Those pictures all vanished. We never saw them. All his notes, everything went away. But anyhow, what we also found out was as he's preparing this radio documentary into the radio station, these apparently government men came in one day and asked for him. They went into one of the studio rooms and talked there for quite a while, and apparently when they left, Sean came out and he was very, very upset, and had told one of the managers that these men had confiscated the voice interviews he did with witnesses, which would have been on reel-to-reel at that time. And so they later broadcast that in a censored fashion. And later on, I mean, of a period of time soon after, here was his biggest story. It was a huge story. He was doing all the research on it, and all of a sudden, he just didn't want to talk about it anymore. And all his notes, all his pictures, all that stuff vanished, and nobody ever saw it again. So something apparently happened at that time period, and there were other people that we heard about that there was pressure put on them as well. And just to give you another little tidbit about it, because it would fit into this, right after we did the Unsolved Mysteries TV show in 1990, it was a season premiere on this case, that opened up for a huge amount of new information. So many people were contacting me who used to live in the area in '65 who had been involved. There were many other sources that contacted me. Some were anonymous tips. One fellow in particular called me, and I remember his name was Myron. He's now deceased. And Myron told me, he said, I see that it's now on TV. I guess I'm allowed to talk about it. And I said, well, what are you talking about, Myron? He said, I work for a large supply house in Ohio. And within a few days, 2 or 3 days after the object fell in Pennsylvania, and it was brought to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, he said, I work for the special supply house, and a Navy officer came to the base, or came to the office, and ordered a large supply of a special type of glazed engineering brick to be shipped to Wright-Patterson. And so anyhow, it was a fascinating story. There was a second truck driver involved who initially refused to talk, but later he did. He did talk to the late Leonard Stringfield, who were close with me, and myself, and confirmed the fact that he was there the first day with the first load of bricks.
And
he
what
said
were they
when he was-
using these bricks for?
Well, apparently they were sealing this thing up inside of a large warehouse building at Wright-Patterson. They were
Okay.
enclosing it in this inside of this other building. And anyhow, when the first truck driver got there, he saw the military flatbed trailer with the tarped object on it that day. The next day when he and Myron returned, and there was an officer, took him into the base, told him, do your job, don't be looking around. Well, Myron was the curious type. When they got there, by the way, flatbed trailer was still there. The tarp was lying over it, but the object was gone. So what he sees these guys in white coveralls with sidearms and various type of protective clothing they're wearing, and they're periodically changing their outer clothing. And he wondered what's going on in that big building, and when he didn't see anybody around, he ran into the entrance and looked inside, and up on the scaffolding, here's this big metallic acorn-shaped object with ladders on it, and the lighting was not real good, and gave us a very detailed account, but they finally found, they thought at first he must have been cleared because he was asking questions, and when they realized that he wasn't cleared, they told him, forget about everything you've seen. We're going to throw you in jail and throw away the keys. But in 20 years, this will all be public knowledge. And, of course, that never happened.
No, of course. Now, everybody sit tight. We're going to take a very short commercial break. We'll be right back. We're going to follow up with the Kecksburg story and more. This is great stuff, everybody. We are speaking with Stan Gordon tonight. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone, to Supernatural Girls Radio. I'm your host, Patricia Baker, here with my co-host from Tucson, PK. PatriciaKirkman.com is where you want to go if you want your numbers read and you want to know what's coming up.
Well, may I add something else to this?
Please.
To find out about your dreams and to get a reading from you, my dear, because you are excellent at what you do.
Thank you so much.
You need to spend more time talking about what you do.
Yes. Well, we're both preeminent readers, and we're happy to help people with any of their questions about their future, their past, or today. So, yes, PatriciaKirkman.com, and you can find me at pbaker@bigpictureagency.com. We're both on Supernatural Girls website. That's Supernatural Girls with a Z. You can just click on our links and get right to us, and we will get right back to you. So feel free to contact us.
To contact her because you're having a lot of dreams and there's going to be a lot more of that taking place over the next few weeks. So
that's right.
You better have her number for fast dial. Okay.
That's right. Feel free to contact me. Happy to answer your questions on dreams and also any reading that you might need because we know these are tumultuous times and we're here to give guidance and support. Feel free to contact each of us anytime you'd like. And again, we're both to be found on the Supernatural Girls website. Now, tonight, we have Stan.
You're Paul. I'm the new Sprintern.
Sprint plus.
Intern. Yeah, clever, right? Looking at getting an amazing iPhone 8?
Yeah, because
now you can lease one iPhone 8, get the other one on Sprint to give your second phone to your new friend.
And you get the best price for unlimited.
And now lease one iPhone 8 and get a second one on us. Visit your local Sprint store, sprint.com/iPhone, or call 1-800-SPRINT1 today.
iPhone 8, 64 gigabyte, $29.17 a month. Second iPhone 8 after $29.17 a month. Credit applied within 2 bills. Requires 2 new lines or 1 new and 1 upgrade with 18-month leases. Early termination results in full balance due. Excludes tax subject to credit and 30-day activation restrictions apply.
Gordon, and he is the man, I'm telling you, for all kinds of supernatural investigations. A great researcher who we're honored to have on our show tonight. If you have a question for Stan, you can write it in our chat room, irnchat.com. That's irnchat.com. We will ask the question on your behalf. Stan will be happy to answer it. And my God, we've got so much to talk about. Let's get back to Myron. Now, off the air, we always talk off the air. And this time we were talking about dear Myron, who has passed on. But he did tell you, Stan, that he saw an alien body. Can you tell us a little bit about that? I know it's a big, long story, but at least tell people a little bit about what he saw.
Well, we can't say for sure it's an alien body, but he saw something odd. When I went to interview him, 1996, I believe it was, when I was filming my Kecksburg the Untold Story documentary, and when we got there to interview him, it was apparent his health was not good. And he indicated that he said he wanted to tell me something he had not told me before. He said he talked to his son about it the night before, and he said, the son said, why are you going to bother and tell him? He said, because I may not be here tomorrow. I want him to know the whole story. And he went on to tell me that when he went into that building that day and he saw the object up on the scaffolding, he said the lighting was not real good, but there was a workbench in there, a work table. And on that workbench there was a small body. It was covered with a white cloth, a white sheet. And he said he could not see a lot of detail. All he could see was, I believe it was a left arm hanging down, and he could see 3 fingers. But he said the skin looked lizard-like. And that's all he could see. And I asked him many, many times to give me more detail. He said, that's all I could possibly see. Well, that was interesting. And it was years later that I began to get some other information. And I don't have time. We don't have time to get into this because I know you want to get into some other aspects of a lot of weird things that go on around here. But there's another witness who we found years later who reluctantly told me about how he was hiding down in the woods, and so indicated that it was there when the military was recovering the object, and that there was on the object itself, he saw what appeared to be a hatch open in the front and a very long elastic arm come out of it. And there's other reports I've had from other people which suggest the possibility that there may have been someone or something inside of the object. Now, I keep an open mind, and I'm always skeptical until I have more information, but I feel that some of these people are telling me the best of their knowledge, what they were telling me to be the truth. The question is, what did they see? Was it something very unusual, or let's speculate, what if it was a human passenger where there was some type of accident within the object and their body was distorted? I'm just thinking of all kind of possibilities because we just don't know. But it's a very interesting aspect of the story, and it just indicates there may be a lot more to this than any of us realize.
Well, I hope that someone who knows more will contact you, Stan, because we deserve to know the truth, and you're certainly an expert at getting to the bottom of it all. This is the first we've heard about a possible live or dead entity associated with this object. So, again, you're kind of giving us some breaking news here, given your great research abilities and the fact that these people have talked to you. This is very, very fascinating. And I wonder, was this long arm that they saw come out of the spaceship, does that mean that entity was alive at the time and then died later? I mean, we can only speculate at this point, but I hope whoever knows more, I hope and pray they will contact you. And again, your website, stangordon.info. So for people that want to contact Stan, that's the website to go to, stangordon.info. So I know you've got so much more to tell us. I'm sorry, Stan. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say my email and phone and all the information is on the website to reach me.
Oh, great.
That's great. And I hope people will reach out to you, have real information about this case and others. So now, you were telling us off the air that you have investigated some fascinating cases of Bigfoot and UFOs together. Tell us about this.
Okay, well, I have to give you a little background, and you'll have to bear with me because it's in-depth, but people need to know about it. 1970, let me get back a little further. 1970, I had founded the first of 3 volunteer research groups, and that was because when my hotline became public in 1969, the phone in my home was ringing off the hook about anything unusual. Calls are coming in not only about UFOs, but haunted houses, UFOs, anything strange and unusual, people are calling in. It was a lot more than I could handle on my own. So it was my goal to establish a research group to go out to investigate these reports. So in 1970, I founded the first of 3 groups. That was called the Westmoreland County UFO Study Group. We're about 30 miles east of Pittsburgh, and we started out quite small and moved into the Pittsburgh area. And I was even surprised who I got involved. I had scientists and engineers and technicians from Westinghouse, from Gulf Research, from Alcoa, There were people from colleges and universities. I had police officers. I had former military intelligence people. We were all doing this around our full-time jobs as volunteers. And I had it set up to respond to cases 24 hours a day. With my electronics background, I set up an elaborate radio communication center and a two-way radio dispatch system in my home so we could dispatch some of the investigators out to the scene. By 1973, we had expanded to cover the state of Pennsylvania. And even to our surprise, we began to get referrals from the media, from the state police, and we are just being very, very actively always busy with reports. But 1973 comes around, and we have the biggest UFO outbreak ever recorded, and then we have the biggest Bigfoot outbreak that ever happened was documented. You might recall that the United States experienced a massive wave in the fall of 1973 that was making a lot of national news at the time. But here in Pennsylvania, it began the first day of the year and didn't end till the last day of the year. There were hundreds and hundreds of UFO reports coming in. And many of these were not lights in the sky. They were large structured craft low to the ground, hovering over roads, sightings on the Pennsylvania Turnpike, hovering over cars, landing reports. I mean, we were out there day and night, and back in those days, it was making a lot of news locally and nationally on the sightings and our investigations. And so 1973, in the summer, we have this massive Bigfoot outbreak, and it all began actually only a few miles from where I live in a very rural area at that time. And a relative called me and said he needed to talk to this person. This incident happened to him. It was July 31st of 73. He was in the bathroom shaving because he always got up early for work. And it was a warm night. He had the bathroom window open with the screen in. Began to smell this funny, rotten odor. Turned around and looked in the window, and here's these two huge glowing red eyes staring at him.
Oh, my God.
Just 8 feet off the ground. And there were dogs behind the house, but they weren't making a sound, which he thought, boy, that's really unusual. The other relatives in the home smelled the funny odor. They said it smelled like rotten eggs of sulfur. Whatever was in the window was gone. So when I went out to interview him a week later, because I didn't get a call till a week later, he was still pretty shook up, and I found out that several weeks before, some of the local boys had taken a shortcut over to the local mall, which was close by, through the woods. They heard a commotion in the woods. They thought it was a deer, began to throw some rocks in, and here comes a 7, 8 foot tall, hairy creature with long arms crossing the road and went up behind the house.
God.
I went out
and they probably had to change their pants after that. Wow.
Well, almost after what we found up there. So some of the kids follow me up. I'm looking around in the area, and I remember up on that hill, the ground conditions were not real good. And I stood around for a while. I checked the area out. Nothing was there. About ready to leave, I happened to look down. There was a partial track and then a complete footprint of the strangest looking thing I'd ever seen. And it was 13 inches long, 8 inches wide, but clearly 3-toed. And the kids came over and said, what kind of animal can make a footprint like that? So I got on the radio, called one of my associates. He came out, and we took photographs and measurements and made a cast. And while we were out there in the field, we get a radio call that one of our investigators, right almost between the Pennsylvania-Ohio line that morning, investigating the case of something 9 foot tall, was looking in a structure, and the police found large footprints up there. So this started this massive Bigfoot wave that went on for weeks and months into 1974. And it was making a tremendous amount of local and national news for weeks and weeks. And many of the Bigfoot sightings were not at night. Many of them were in daylight. Many of them were at very close range. Where they walked out in front of cars, for example, so 5 to 10 feet away from witnesses. They walked near mobile homes. A lot of sightings in rural areas, and some in more populated areas where there was woods around. In many of those instances, either my team or the police departments would be on the scene within minutes to hours. So we're documenting all this information as it's going on, and we made many casts of footprints, interviewed multitudes of eyewitnesses, saw a lot of very interesting evidence out in the field. I smelled it on one time. I believe I chased a Bigfoot through a field. on a farm where the thing kept coming back. Whatever it was a lot faster than we were. It was ahead of us in the dark in a cornfield, making this very strange sound like somebody with asthma, very loud, heavy breathing sound. We recorded the sounds. We could never catch up to whatever it was. There were tracks in the barn, and the animals were very, very upset and shook up on the farm at the time. There were multitudes of cases that we looked into.
Stan, let me ask you, this is the first time I've heard of a three-toed, is this a three-toed Bigfoot, you think, or was the three-toed belonging to something else?
Well, it's a long story. There's a lot of things I've uncovered about Bigfoot that a lot of people don't know about, or a lot of people in the Bigfoot field would prefer not to talk about. This I found out a long time ago. Here's what we know, and many people in the Bigfoot field are aware of this. You know, historically, you hear about a lot of sightings in the Pacific Northwest and Canada, California, Oregon, and you hear about your typical five-toed footprints. But what has been known for many, many years, going back to at least the 1970s, because I was in touch with many of the well-known people in the field back in those days in the United States and around the world, and in those areas where you had your typical Bigfoot sightings and your typical five-toed tracks, they would also at times find three-toed tracks and even four-toed tracks, which is another part of the mystery because it still goes on. And these do not appear to be hoax tracks. I mean, we had a lot of experts in my teams, and we could tell when something was fabricated or not. But there are many cases of Bigfoot where three-toed tracks are showing up. In some of the famous cases, I believe the Falk Monster and the other ones around the country, three-toed tracks have been reported, as well as five-toed tracks. And during this time period in 73 in PA, we had five-toed tracks and three-toed tracks showing up. But anyhow, all these reports are coming in for months and months. I had always felt, from what I knew about Bigfoot, and in Pennsylvania, sightings of Bigfoot go back to the Native American legends. I mean, there are articles in the 1800s in the newspapers about these events. Many sightings ever since then. So I worked on hundreds of Bigfoot sightings over the years in recent weeks and months. And always felt that Bigfoot appeared to be some type of unknown animal that science had yet to confirm. But as these reports are breaking in 73, some very strange things begin to come to our attention. And you got to remember, 1973, there's no cell phones, there's no internet.
Exactly.
There wasn't a lot of TV shows about it. So generally when people were concerned or afraid, they generally called the police. So a lot of these reports were initially coming into the police departments. One of the weird things we began to notice was our teams would get out to some of these locations. There would be trails of footprints that would suddenly stop and disappear when there should have been more tracks, sometimes even in fresh snow. And even in recent years, we had cases, I guess, we have deep, fresh snow, there's no other tracks around, and you have these large tracks with a big stride that are deep, and they suddenly stop and vanish, which makes absolutely no sense. That was something we began to scratch our head. And then we began to see this pattern in 73. We would have a UFO sighting in a certain area. Within minutes to hours to days later, we'd have a Bigfoot sighting or vice versa. And then we began to have well-documented case with Bigfoot and UFOs seen together at the same time and place. And we were really scratching like, what is going on here? I mean, none of us were out there looking for this. This is the kind of things that were going on, and it was going on over a widespread area. One of the cases was September 27, 1973, up in Beaver County, north of Pittsburgh, where two women were waiting for a friend to pick them up, and they see this 8 to 9 foot tall, upright, man-like Bigfoot creature with very long arms covered with white hair. You don't hear about the white ones very often, but they continue to be reported on occasion. It was strange enough for them to see this huge, hairy creature running across the road towards the woods, but in one of its hands, it was carrying a small ball of light. And a short time later, an object came across the sky and projected a beam of light down into the woods where the creature ran into. Now, we thought, that's pretty interesting, and that's just an example. But then we had the case of all cases, which occurred 44 years ago today, October 25th, 1973, in Fayette County, Pennsylvania, which is along the Chestnut Ridge, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a few minutes.
Yes,
and
you will.
And that was an area that was very active during that time period and continues to be year after year, including this year. But it was a very strange event. It was the case that convinced me and my team that there was a lot more stranger aspects to Bigfoot than any of us realized. What happened was, about 10:30 that night, I got a call from a state trooper from the Uniontown Barracks up in Fayette County. When I talked to him, he was a little shook up. He asked me if we could get a team up there as soon as possible, that he felt that there may be something up in the pasture and might still be there. So what I found out was about 9 o'clock, about 15 people in this rural community outside of Uniontown, they observed this object about as big as a barn, a big ball in the sky about 100 feet off the ground, and slowly beginning to move down towards the pasture. And the story really should focus on the farmer's son who was coming down the farm lane that evening. He sees the object in the sky. He's coming out to visit his father on his father's farm where this is occurring. He sees other people standing outside, people on a porch of a house watching this thing in the sky, coming lower and lower to the ground. So he goes up on a hill to get a better view. And he and two young boys, as they watch this thing, they decide they want to go up to investigate to see what this thing is coming down his dad's pasture. So they run over to his dad's farm. They grab a .30-06 rifle and a handful of ammunition. What he didn't realize at the time was in that ammunition were 2 tracers. So for those that are listening at hunt, you know, when you fire that tracer, you just get that luminous trail. So anyhow, as they're moving down the farm lane, the dogs in the distance are going crazy. They hear this high-pitched whining sound, and they hear this baby crying sounds. And as they get closer and closer to the pasture, all the sounds are getting louder. They angle their truck with the headlights on to see the way up to the top of the pasture, and they notice that it looks like something's draining the power from the headlights. They've never had that problem before. And, of course, historically, there are many incidents of low-level UFO cases where there's a power drainage or loss of power.
Yes, that happens a lot.
Anyhow, as they're walking up the pasture, they get to the top of the hill. They're standing there, and they're looking across the field, and they can't believe what they're seeing because that object is about 250 feet away, and it's now on the ground or right above it. Now it's like a big white, it's not a complete sphere, it's like a half a sphere, like a big white dome, illuminating the whole area, about 100 feet or so in diameter, and making this loud, whining noise. They're standing there in amazement. They can't believe what they're seeing. But then their attention's drawn to this barbed wire fence about 75 feet away. So the poles on that fence are about 6 feet tall. Along that barbed wire fence, one behind the other, are these 2 huge, hairy Bigfoot creatures walking one behind the other in their direction. The one in front's about 8 feet tall. The one behind it's about 7 feet tall. When these guys saw him, their first thought was, oh, they got to be bear. But they know what bear looked like. These things were not like a bear at all. They soon realized that. I mean, the arms were so long that have the long matted hair hanging off the body. The arms are so long, they're almost down to the ground. These things have no neck. They're walking stiffly, one behind the other, upright. The eyes, they said, look about the size of 50-cent piece, but they're luminous and glowing bright green. They're making this loud baby crying, whining sound.
How strange.
The one kid is so scared that he runs out of the field. The other kid starts yelling to the guy to shoot at them, and he takes his first shot, which is just a tracer, so you just got that luminous trail. He fires the second tracer, and at that time, what happens is the largest of the 2 creatures reaches out as though to grab that tracer, and at exactly that same time, that huge object in the field disappears. It doesn't take off, it just vanishes. So most all the luminosity is gone, that loud whining noise is gone, all the brightness is gone, and the object is gone. The creatures turn around and slowly start walking back along the fence line towards the woods. At that point, the guy starts firing live ammo from his .30-06 mainly into the main creature. And that guy always said to me, he said, I'll never forget how that huge thing, that creature, kept staring at me as I'm pumping my live ammo into it for my 30-06 with no effect on him whatsoever. At that point, they ran back to the truck. They went to the farmhouse, told the people what happened, took him to a neighbor's, and called the state police. When the troop arrived 45 minutes later, the witness was really reluctant to talk to him. He said, just forget about it. You're going to think I'm crazy. And the trooper said, look, we had a report of 2 similar creatures on the mountain the night before. I have to go up to investigate the report. So they go up in the troop car, and they're looking for evidence up in that field. And the state trooper told me the area where the object was on the ground was self-luminescent glowing, about 100 feet or more in diameter. He said the farm animals would not go near it. He said if he had a newspaper in his hand, he could have read the newspaper from the light coming off the glowing area.
Wow.
The story got stranger and stranger during the night when our teams got there. It's a long story. I wrote the whole thing up in my Silent Invasion book. It's probably one of the weirdest stories ever documented, but it was the case that convinced my team and myself that there's a lot more to this phenomena, and it's much stranger than anybody realized. And it was probably around that time I was beginning to ask more questions, and I've asked that ever since that time over the years with all the Bigfoot cases I investigated that, something makes no sense here. If Bigfoot is real, and they're seeing all over Pennsylvania, all over the country, all over the world, something similar, after all these years, we don't have a body, it makes absolutely no sense when you really consider all the different...
Yeah, all this evidence that people, all these sightings and experiences people have. Well, we're going to take another very short commercial break, everybody. Stay tuned. We are speaking with Stan Gordon tonight. You can find him at stangordon.info. So, again, you are listening to Supernatural Girls Radio. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone, to Supernatural Girls Radio. I'm your host, Patricia Baker, and I'm here with my co-host, PK, and our amazing guest tonight, Stan Gordon. He is the man for investigations of all things paranormal, and we are talking right now about Bigfoot and UFOs, and I know, Stan, we're going to get into Chestnut Ridge and one of the strangest stories that you've heard recently, so please continue.
Right.
What else can you tell us? My gosh, we're on the edge of our seats here, Stan.
Well, first of all, what I'm trying, it's very hard to explain something that none of us have the answers for. But, and I'm not trying to suggest, for example, what you're hearing, that Bigfoot is necessarily an alien riding around in a spaceship, because we don't know for sure what the UFOs are. I mean, there's a lot of speculation out there. But more and more, the evidence I'm seeing is that, for a lack of a better term, that some type of UFOs and various type of cryptids, which include Bigfoot, many of the Bigfoot cases, appear to be interdimensional, that under certain conditions, they come into our physical reality. They can look physically solid at times, even though there's cases where they don't always appear to be completely physically solid. A lot of people don't know about those either. They can leave evidence and they're gone. They come and they go. And there's multitudes of reports. My latest book, Astonishing Encounters, Pennsylvania's Unknown Creatures, gets to all kind of weird entities and things people don't even heard of before, which suggests that as well. But anyhow, going back to that 73, 74 time period, we began to see even weirder reports, not just a Bigfoot and UFO seen together, but other cases that suggested that there may well be more to Bigfoot than a flesh and blood explanation. It was a case that happened February 6, 1974, way up in the mountains of Fayette County again, and again along the Chestnut Ridge in that general area. That was the case that convinced me that there was a lot more to Bigfoot than just an unknown animal. And I'm sure a lot of your listeners will recall that time period because there was a large national trucker strike going on. There was gas rationing going on around the country. There was violence on the highways across the country. So in Pennsylvania, the National Guard was patrolling with the state police. They both responded to this incident that evening when it happened. I couldn't get up there because I couldn't get gas till early the next morning. This woman lived in a little cabin home deep in the mountains. She lived there all her life. She knew animals very well. She was pretty much not afraid of too many things. She was a very good shot with her weapons. And she's sitting there watching TV, and she hears this commotion on her little front porch. She had some empty pop cans out there, and someone was knocking the pop cans around. A few weeks before, there was a pack of wild dogs came through, and she figured, you know what, I bet you those dogs are back. So she thought, you know what, I'll grab my shotgun, and I'll load one chamber. I'll just shoot over their head and scare those dogs away.
Brave lady.
Brave lady.
She grabs her shotgun, loads one chamber. She walks over to the wall to turn on the switch to turn on the porch light. She walks to the front door, opens up the door, and she walks out. There's no dogs there, but only a few feet away, right in front of her, is this huge, hairy, Bigfoot-type creature with his arms straight up over his head. And she never, the numerous times I interviewed her, she never ever called it a Bigfoot. She said it looked like a great big hairy ape. So what does she do when she sees this creature? She fires right into it with her shotgun. She said there was this bright flash of light, like the flash on a camera, and the creature disappears right in front of her.
Wow.
So her in-laws hear the gunshot 100 feet away, and they call her and ask her, what are you shooting at? She tried to explain to him what happened. Her son-in-law grabs his pistol. He starts walking up the dirt road towards the home, the cabin home. He saw a figure running up the road, and as he got closer, he said he was surrounded by 4 or 5 hairy people with eyes like coals of fire, started shooting at them. He ran into the cabin, and about the same time, there's this large object that he said, like a big Christmas ornament with red lights on it, hovering over the woods at the same time. That's when they called the state police.
Oh, my
So by the
goodness.
time the state police and the other investigators got up to the scene, whatever was there was gone. However, I talked to the primary investigator, and he said, I don't know what happened up there. It was something very strange. That he based on the animal reactions. Yeah, and I know I mentioned to you, but I probably didn't mention this to your listeners. In all the years I've been doing this, I have never personally seen a UFO or Bigfoot myself. But I did see what the officers saw. I've seen the animal reactions. You can fool people, you can't fool the animals. Very commonly, when Bigfoot, these creatures are around farm animals, and animals are very shook up, very scared, don't behave as normal, but it's very prominent in even the most vicious dogs. And this is something you couldn't fabricate. Generally, when they're close by, most dogs are just like paralyzed. They will not bark, they don't move, they cower, they hide. Sometimes their diet changes. They won't even eat right for 2 or 3 days later. You can't fabricate that. I remember one of the troopers told me, he said, when I got up there that evening, there were several big dogs there. I think one was an Eskimo Spitz, one was a German Shepherd. One of them was in a cage, and the dog should have been barking and going crazy. It wouldn't make a sound. He put his hand inside, tried to move the dog and pull the dog out. Dog wouldn't even move. Should have ripped the guy's arm off. The next morning, everything was back to normal when I got up to the scene. That was one among other cases which suggested that we were dealing with something that wasn't a normal, unknown flesh and blood creature.
Yes,
and
that makes
in more
sense.
and more cases of other cryptids I've investigated over the years, we're seeing this as well, more and more, even in recent months, in some of these reports. So some of the other cryptids we investigate here would be Thunderbird reports, Black Panther sightings, and then a whole variety of all kind of other weird things that vary from flying humanoids to floating entities to just all kind of weird things that people are reporting, even in recent weeks. And the Thunderbird reports are very interesting. I mean, historically, reports of these giant birds have been around for years and years. And it's very difficult, just like with UFO sightings, to judge altitude and size. But in some cases, these huge flying creatures have been very low off the ground or actually on the ground. We've had incidents where they were blocking the roadway, and the witnesses could see the wingtips, the end of the wings on the road. There was one case in neighboring West Virginia back in 2007 where a fellow was riding down a 2-lane road that morning, had to hit his brakes because here's this huge, monstrous bird with roadkill in its mouth. He said it stood at least 4 feet tall. It was taller than the top of his vehicle. He was staring at it. It was staring at him. It was hobbling back and forth, trying to get off the ground with its huge body, flapping its wings, and he said he's watching the wingtips, and he said you can see the dust and dirt going.
You're Paul. I'm the new Sprintern.
Sprint Plus.
Intern. Yeah, clever, right? Looking at getting an amazing iPhone 8?
Yeah, because...
Now you can lease one iPhone 8, get the other one on Sprint to give your second phone to your new friend.
And you get the best price for unlimited.
And now lease one iPhone 8 and get a second one on us. Visit your local Sprint store, sprint.com/iPhone, or call 1-800-SPRINT1 today.
iPhone 8 64 gigabyte $29.17 a month. Second iPhone 8 after $29.17 a month. Credit applied within 2 bills. Requires 2 new lines or 1 new and 1 upgrade with 18-month leases. Early termination results in full balance due. Excludes tax subject to credit and third activation restrictions apply.
Up from the ground, and finally it got up over the trees and went away. He said he went back to the scene the next day to measure it. It was 21 feet across.
Oh my God. It's enormous, enormous. Where do these things come from?
And even more recently, there's been a number of these giant bird sightings. Some of them up along the ridge, and the last week of May of this year, up on top of the ridge. And I mean, I've interviewed a lot of these people, and these are really credible people. And these people want no publicity. Most people I talk to want no publicity. But anyhow, they've been living up there for years, and they said during that period in May, on a couple occasions, they were seeing these huge dark birds, generally dark brown or black, and with huge wingspans. And one day they saw a number of them circling above. But on one day in particular, several of these things landed in their big garden in their backyard, and there was 6 or 8 of them on the ground. And they thought, first thought was they must be condors. There's like no birds like that around here that big. But these people know turkey vultures. They knew blue herons. They knew hawks. They said that's not what these things were. And they estimated that some of these things stood 5.5 to 6 feet tall with at least a 10 to 12 foot wingspan. The smaller ones stood about 4.5 to 5 feet tall. And luckily, they got some pictures.
Oh.
And even though they're not that great, you can see some detail. And I had a bird expert look at some of the pictures, and he was skeptical, but he was really scratching his head because he looked at some of these pictures, and one specimen in particular, he said it would appear to be very tall and had a very large neck, and he mentioned how the head and the neck was being held straight up, and it stumped him because he had never seen a bird of that size in that position. So that was kind of interesting. And then even more recently, and this would be up in northern Pennsylvania, there have been a lot of sightings up around Tionesta, a Bigfoot, up north the Allegheny National Forest, up towards Kinzua Dam. And anyhow, this was a man and another person was in the vehicle at the time. And I'm just trying to think here. It was only a few months ago. Let's see if I can find some notes on this thing while we're talking. But he had an encounter, and it was very strange. And he said this occurred around July 15th, so it wasn't far from the time of that other sighting. They're riding down this road near Big Run, PA, in Jefferson County. The headlights on the road, about 10 to 12 feet ahead of them, they noticed a large deer standing on the right side of the road. Seconds later, this huge giant bird swooped down to within 10 feet that moved left to right in front of their vehicle. They could see it clearly in the high beams. The wings were down when they saw it. They never saw it flap its wings. The entire bird was either dark brown or black. The wingspan appeared to be much larger than the deer. Estimated it was at least 10 to 12 foot. They could see the feathers on it. They could see its long body, very large wingspan, and they had to appear to be more flat. It was short, and the beak was short. They heard no sound. When the bird swooped down, it glided 2 to 3 feet above the ground. They thought maybe it was going down after the deer. But the witness said they saw it for like 5 to 6 seconds. They had never seen a bird that big before. It looked like it had a head similar to an eagle, but the head was flatter and had a short beak. And that just goes on and on and on.
Yeah, these are amazing stories. Let me just stop you for a second. We've got just a couple questions I wanted to ask you from the chat room. I don't want to ignore these folks. This is from Karen. She's asking, in all the years you've been doing this, do you think the increase of YouTube paranormal footage postings has made it tougher for investigators like you to be heard from the rest of the crowd? Do you think it's made it tougher for you or easier?
Well, it's pros and cons. I mean, what the media exposure is doing from the TV shows, YouTube, it's at least getting the information out there that these things are allegedly being seen around the country and around the world. So in some ways, it's encouraging people who may have been reluctant to report before. More of them maybe are willing to come forward and talk, even though the majority of people call me. They may tell me about it, and many reluctantly, but they don't want their names used.
Right, right. Well, that's an interesting perspective. And then here's another quick question for you from Veritas, who's asking, since the government is aware of UFOs, are they also aware of Bigfoot?
I believe so. In fact, in my books, I go into that, going back to that wave of 1973. There's no doubt that there was some government interest in our investigations, and there were some mystery men that showed up. So I go into that in the Silent Invasion book. There were other incidents, some very, very detailed incidents I've had with UFOs and cryptids. And there were some cases which suggested the possibility that some government agencies got involved in the investigations on their own as well. And I've said for a long time, I believe that the government has an interest both in UFOs and Bigfoot. And I wouldn't be a bit surprised if they're looking more and more into what I've been looking into the interdimensional theory, that there may be more of this as something extraterrestrial. I don't think the government has all the answers themselves. I have no doubt that they're very intrigued by it, they're very concerned over it, but they're not in control of what's happening, and they don't have all the answers themselves. They're still trying to figure out what's going on out there.
Yeah, we think you're right. That's absolutely what's going on. They don't have all the answers, and I'm sure they would like to have them, but they're far from it. So as you walked into these other investigations, my gosh, they just sound stranger and stranger. So you've had investigations on these enormous birds. What about the flying hominids? There's been a lot of reports in Chicago. Have you had that out there in Pennsylvania?
Yeah, we have. But I'm just going to tell you about one more, because this is recent from another researcher contacted me very recently. He's getting a lot of reports of other parts along the Chestnut Ridge as well. But he got a report recently in early October of this year up on the ridge. And let me see if I have it here. Okay. And this was outside of Ligonier, PA, which is where we get a lot of reports for years of all kind of weird things going on. But this person reportedly told them that they saw this huge flying creature, like a giant hawk with a 10 to 12-foot wingspan. They saw it flapping its wings, but heard no sound, even though the witness was close enough to be able to hear. But the strange part of the story was the witness swears that the bird was transparent and she could see through the bird. And that's just an example of a lot of the different weird cryptids I'm getting. Just like the Black Panther reports. You know, we all know when we think about Black Panther, we're thinking about black jaguar, black leopards. Not common in this part of the world. They've seen them up in New England. They've seen them around here for years and years. And there's a lot of strange aspects to the sightings of black panthers, for example. What a lot of people don't know is, on occasion, for example, when you have an outbreak, let's say a Bigfoot in a particular area, sometimes you get reports of other cryptids showing up at the same time. Very commonly, Black Panther sightings occur during the same time Bigfoot is being seen. And something else a lot of people are not aware of or don't discuss, there have been incidents with more than one cryptid are seen together. So sometimes Bigfoot has been seen, for example, with a Black Panther or other cryptid at the same time. These are a lot of things that people don't know or would prefer not to talk about it.
Yeah, well, it is a little overwhelming, I think, for a lot of people, not our audience, of course, but most people in the world today, to think about Bigfoot and then to think about another cryptid coming into this reality through a dimensional portal. It is quite overwhelming, but it's great. I mean, we love it because this is the stuff that we love to talk about. We love to experience these things ourselves and have at times. But now you have other things that you've heard about. You've heard about the flying human hominids. Tell us about that, because that's been huge in Chicago. But you've also had that in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, and I'm aware of cases around the country and around the world, but probably one of our most interesting reports occurred in 2011 up in Butler County, Pennsylvania, north of Pittsburgh. And for a better term, they now call it the Butler Gargoyle. And this was March of 2011. I interviewed this witness numerous times. He's very professional. The guy was a businessman, was riding down a dark road at night. Headlights caught something on the right side of the grass. He thought it was a deer. He got closer, turned on his high beams, and all of a sudden this huge 8-foot-tall creature stands up from the ground, takes 3 big steps across the road, and goes into the woods. And the guy said to me, he said, people claim they see Bigfoot. He said, this thing was not a Bigfoot. He said, this thing was at least 8 foot tall, but he said it was covered with smooth leather-like skin that was either dark tan or light brown. He said the creature never looked at him. He only saw it from the left side. The head appeared to be flat, but it was kind of swept back like an aerodynamic helmet. He said the face was flat and the eyes were not clearly defined, but he thought they might be pointed in the corner. The ears on the left side were long and flat and came up and back and pointed backwards like a flap. He said the arms were muscular and a little longer than that of a human, but it had claws instead of fingers. He said the one trait that really stood out was its legs. It had very muscular legs, and he said the legs did not move like that of a human. They looked like they were bent backwards. He said he also saw what appeared to be wings on its back, which were tucked into the body with the wingtips extending towards the side of the head. And he went back and walked in front of a big construction sign. He went back and measured the sign. It was 8 feet tall, so it was a little taller. Interestingly, within days after this man reported this, several other people in that same area reported the sighting to the local BORU investigating group up there. I'll read you one of the statements from that they received. This is up near Reimersburg. The 2 witnesses were leaving the ice cream stand, heading down the road. 30 feet away from them, the creature walks out in front of the road. It was at least 9 feet tall, had dark brown skin, long arms and broad shoulders, had a pointed head, flat forehead, pointed ears, and what appeared to be wings on its back. The body was extremely muscular. There were 4 finger-like claws in each hand. The eyes were squinted, but swept upwards at the corner. As the creature turned, the whole body would turn. The movement of the arms were not normal. The mouth looked like a slit. The wings looked see-through, like see-through mesh, resembled wings on a bat. The claws were black as coal. The witness stated this thing was straight from hell.
Wow. Oh, my goodness. And you know what makes this so much more credible, too, is when you have other witnesses in the area that have seen it. They don't know each other, but they've had a similar experience. So this sounds like a gargoyle. It really does. What the heck are they doing?
And like I said, even in recent weeks, there have been numerous other strange reports coming in. Like I said, a lot of sightings are occurring not only along the Chestnut Ridge, but that's still very active, with all kind of other reports coming in from all over parts of Pennsylvania, western PA. Some weird sightings, which we may not have time to get into. If they go to my website, they can read some of the latest reports, including this very weird cryptid, this creature seen by a police officer on patrol in recent weeks.
And what is this thing? You said it's very strange. Give us some hints here as to what it looks like.
Well, what this police officer saw in the late August, he's on patrol, and he patrols the area all the time, and he saw this strange light, like a ball of light, not very bright, dull, low to the ground. He knew there was no type of artificial lighting in the area. As he moves closer, there's a light suddenly rises up or stands up from the ground. And he said it was the weirdest thing he'd ever seen, he told me. He said the ball was actually the head of a strange being that looked to be 6 feet tall or larger. It was tall and it was skeletal thin. He said that he was the opinion that when he first saw it, was lying on its belly on the ground with its head facing the road. Then it stood up and faced the road, and the glow was not real bright, lit up the shoulder area. The creature turned and faced him, then turned to the left, and he said with incredible speed, it moved off. And he said it was abnormal the way it moved, faster than anything I'd ever seen. It was there, then it was gone. Something very common with cryptids. People tell me this. They're here and they're gone. They appear, they disappear. And he said This head was about 8 to 10 inches in diameter, ball shape, but maybe more of a fuzzy egg shape. The light emitted to be dull white. Light illuminated the shoulder, the top of the chest, and a section of the arms. He could see no hands. Chest looked to be about 18 inches across. The waist appeared to be small, but arms were abnormally long. The long limbs also looked skeletal with no muscle mass. The skin tone appeared to be dark grayish blue. He could not see any facial features. As the creature ran off, he pulled his car up to there, got a spotlight on the ground, could see no evidence of it. And now, interestingly, just about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, another witness called me who knew nothing about this, lives in another area of the county, and described encountering a creature very, very similar.
Oh my gosh. See,
Incredible.
this, and it's getting stranger because we don't even have a reference point for this one. This doesn't fall under a lot of the categories you've heard before. Now, Stan, you said there's a movie out that you're featured in, and people can get this from Amazon. And what is the name of this? It's about the Chestnut Ridge. I know you said before. It sounds fascinating. I can't wait to see it. So the name of it is?
It's called Invasion on Chestnut Ridge. It's by Small Town Monsters. You can go to the website, smalltownmonsters.com, and it's available on a download on Amazon right now. You can go to Amazon and you can see it on there. You can rent it, I believe, or you can purchase it from them as well. But it's a very, very well-done documentary on a lot of the strange things that go on along the Chestnut Ridge.
Well, I can't wait to see it, and I know our audience is going to go see it as well. And again, for people, if you'd like to contact Stan and purchase his books, you can go to stangordon.info. That is stangordon.info. And Stan, we can't thank you enough for an exciting hour and a half that feels like it went by in about 2 minutes. It's just not long enough. You have so much to share with us. We've got to have you back on the show. You're a fantastic guest, and we love hearing all of what you're so involved with, and we're so glad that you're in love with the paranormal like we are. Just an amazing show tonight. Thank you so much. On next week, everybody, we'll be back with another show. We have the Carl Higdon abductee case. Very little has been talked about publicly. We have Marjorie Higdon and her husband Carl. They're coming on the show next week. Don't miss it. Until then, everybody, we will see you on the Blue Highway. Good night.
Good night.